This is the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast with your host, Kevin Murray.
Hi there. It's the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast. I've got a special guest. He plays a lot of best ball. His name is Pete.
No, I'm just playing, man. That's the best. I like that clip that'll live on forever, right? So, anyways, this is the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast. On this episode, we have an incredible guest. He's been creating fantasy sports content for several years now. His YouTube channels cover every imaginable category in fantasy. He's the creative lead for Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life and the voice of the Fantasy Life newsletter. It's the deposit king himself, Peter Overzet. Welcome in, my friend.
Thanks for having me, Kevin. Yes, yeah, you're referencing that the TikTok I did. I think I recorded that early on in quarantine. It was right when COVID hit, and I was very bored and started making a lot of very niche specific TikToks. But that was one of the few that had mass appeal. So normally the stuff I do is like very drilled down within niches, but that one seemed to catch the eye of everybody.
It was hilarious. It was fitting. Obviously, there were so many people that were bored as can be diving into making content. So it was a funny one for sure. So how's fatherhood treating you?
It's good, man. Yeah, I have a 7-month-old daughter. Been a total blast. You know, it does really flip your life on its head. I'm thinking back to, last year at this time in the summer, and it's like I have all this time for all my projects for fantasy, and now everything's condensed into a tightly packed schedule. But I'm loving it. And if anything, it's made me more efficient. When you can't waste time, as you know, I was trying to schedule this between dad duty and all of that stuff. So I can't complain. I really am loving it.
That's great. It's great. Now, I've always enjoyed your content. It's been several years now. It's so entertaining. You bring so much humor to the table and actionable advice. It's been great. So, where did your passion for fantasy sports come from? Were you a big sports fan growing up?
Yeah, I always loved sports growing up. I think my first kind of experience playing fantasy, I was in high school. This would have been the early 2000s. And my buddy and I would go into our library and we would do these Yahoo NBA basketball drafts. But because we didn't have a full hour to do a live draft, they had an option where you could auto draft the team. So you click a button and then it gives you your team. And we would basically just spit these out like slot machines and just be like, do we like the players we got? No, let's do another one. So there's probably a time where I had like 95 basketball leagues, just seeing if I liked the team I got. And then, then in college, I started playing fantasy basketball, more hardcore. And then that led me to football. And so, I've been playing, nonstop since then and like getting progressively more obsessed. Then you start to find dynasty, then you start to add high stakes leagues, then best ball comes. And now it's just, we're playing year round. So it's been a slippery slope, but now it consumes me.
So when did you first start creating content for fantasy?
Yeah, it was interesting because for a while I was just playing fantasy, but I was starting to do a lot of comedy stuff on the side. I started doing improv. I did some stand-up. And it was probably like 3 or 4 years into doing regular improv. A couple of my buddies I found out were obsessed with fantasy football too. So we started kicking around this idea. We're like, should we try like a fantasy comedy hybrid, which when you really think about it, is a very dumb idea because like the Venn diagram of people who are interested in that, specifically live improv comedy, at least when you put something out on the internet, there's lots of people who might be able to enjoy it. But we were doing some fantasy football comedy shows in a black box theater in Cambridge, Massachusetts for like 14 people and just doing jokes that only we thought were funny. I don't know why we thought it was a good idea, but that inevitably led to the Fantasy Football Comedy Hour podcast. And then I started just doing a ton of content from there.
That's crazy. So who's Peter Manzanelli?
He was another guy that came out of that era when I was doing way more comedy at the time. And I knew I wanted to start doing more video stuff. And I was like, I don't know if I don't have the chops to be like a real fantasy analyst. I was still getting to know the game a lot, but I was like, I can do comedy. What if I did a character? And at the time I had started to get into DFS and I noticed like all these personalities online and they were kind of like, acting too cool for school. And everyone thought so highly of themselves, kind of cocky, kind of like Guido, Jersey Shore types. And I was like, I think this would be right for parody. This guy who thinks he's, great at DFS, great at poker, obsessed with crypto, all this stuff, and just kind of spoof it from there. So I did that character for 3 to 4 years pretty regularly and followed DFS, crypto, poker, all that stuff.
That's awesome. Well, fast forward to today. You and the team at Fantasy Life are shaking things up big time in the fantasy industry. What's your experience been like working with the team, the amazing team at Fantasy Life?
It's awesome. It was, I started writing the newsletter that TikTok we referenced at the top. That was during the beginning of quarantine in that same summer. I remember talking to Matthew, and Matthew reached out to me he's like, hey, I'd really like to do something with this email list I have for his fantasy life. He's collected all these emails over the years. He's like, I'd love to get some content going and do a regular newsletter. Would you be interested in writing that? And, when Matthew Berry calls you up and presents you with an opportunity like that, you say, yes, where do I sign? So for a couple years, I was just writing that completely on my own. Matthew's a very busy guy. He had a team, and I would just file that newsletter every day in season, 6-7 days a week during the season as well. And then this past year, they really turned it into a big company with a lot of big initiatives. We brought on Elliot as the CEO, Jordan Fiegelman as our director of content. And next thing you know, Fantasy Life's turning into this just awesome content arm. I'm sure all the people we've been able to hire recently. And so it's been fun to watch this thing that I was kind of just working on by myself for a while turn into such a big operation, and definitely proud of all the work we've been doing over there.
Yeah, tell me about the new website and a lot of the features that are coming out of Fantasy Life.
Yeah, we got stuff going in every different direction. And I think, in the same way I like to play all of the different, fantasy types, Fantasy Life is really covering the spectrum. We did a ton of dynasty content. We, of course, have, Dwayne and our team doing some incredible rankings. Our guy Waz just got first in the competition for rankings last year. So we got him. We're doing a ton of best ball stuff. We launched the Best Ball Hub, which I love because I draft so many best ball teams. So you get to review your exposures. Now we have a whole sports betting wing coming with Matthew Friedman and Matt McCune, heading that up. So yeah, whatever kind of, fantasy and sports betting that you're into, Fantasy Life is covering it.
And you got the Fantasy Life Discord, and you got a show on Sirius XM.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the Discord is awesome. I do office hours in there on Tuesday afternoons. If anyone ever wants to hop in there, ask me questions, talk about whatever. And then XM, yeah, I'll be coming back on XM as we get closer to the season. I do that show in season with Kendall Valenzuela, who I know you got to hang out with this past weekend. And yeah, it's a fun time. I love getting to do a variety of stuff: radio, Discord, articles, podcasts, and we got it all going on at Fantasy Life.
Well, yeah, you definitely like a variety of things. Let's talk about the Peter Overzet YouTube channel. You have so many different channels, playlists, live streams. How about I just name off your current schedule, and you just kind of break down what those shows are all about? Let's start with the Best Ball Breakfast.
Yeah, so that's a show. It was so funny because before Best Ball became as big as it has been these past couple years, I basically had a show I did on Monday mornings where I reviewed my DFS lineups. And that was kind of the first piece of regular content I started doing, within the fantasy space. And so I just had this like Monday at 10 a.m. I'm reviewing, my DFS lineups. And it ended up being kind of a sad masochistic exercise because most weeks, if you play tournaments, you lose money. Even when you're a good player, most weeks you're going to lose. So I'd come on here and be like, here's my crappy lineup again. But what happened was I kind of built up an audience that expected me to be live on Monday mornings at 10 a.m. And then Best Ball takes off and I'm like, holy cow, we don't need to review DFS lineups. We can just draft Best Ball teams. And so that's how Best Ball Breakfast started in that 10 a.m. slot. And, the difference between drafting a Best Ball team and reviewing a DFS team is night and day, because you're reviewing a bad DFS lineup. When you do a Best Ball team, you're like, this could be the one that wins the $3 million. It's just all hope and promise. So I much more enjoy the energy of Best Ball Breakfast than I do the GPP lineup reviews.
How about ADP chasing?
ADP Chasing is a show we launched over on Ship Chasing. So that's a podcast a lot of people now know. Pat Carrain, who won Best Ball Mania 3, me and him started Ship Chasing 5-6 years ago, kind of covering us playing high stakes fantasy football. Now Ben Gretsch is one of our co-hosts over there. And because of the rise of Best Ball and people so in tune with the market and the movements throughout the offseason in a way they've never been, we launched the show called ADP Chasing. Sam Sherman, Davis Maddock, and Pat Carrain host that every Monday, and they just go through the market. They try to foresee what ADP movement's going to happen. They break things down, and Sam Sherman has been leading the charge and makes some incredible charts. And I think it's like the ultimate companion piece to anyone who's drafting best ball teams all summer long.
Okay, what's Millie Best Ball Day?
Millie Best Ball Base. So that's not a specific show, but that's tomorrow,
Okay.
July 18th. So last year on that day, Pat Carrain, who won Best Ball Mania 3, and King Capital, who won the regular season prize for Best Ball Mania, the best team in the regular season, both of them coincidentally drafted their team on the same day, July 18th. So Pat Carrain celebrating by hosting a mega stream over on his channel. And then you probably saw on my channel, I'm drafting Splash Play. That's a show I do with Chris Spags every Tuesday. And so I just had to throw it in there. Hey, this is the special day. This is when the $1 million lineups are drafted.
Nice, nice. What's the club?
The club is a show that we started doing when the NFT boom started. Top Shot was blowing up. You know, I interviewed a few different people at the top. Jack Settleman, who had purchased one of the biggest Top Shot moments. It seems very sad and depressing to talk about Top Shot now because the market is completely plummeted and Top Shot is basically fumbled the bag, I would say, as far as they had this incredibly promising thing and they kind of ran it into the ground. However, it truly is about the friends you make along the way, because guys like Andy and Clay and Peter Jennings and Jack, who I do the show regularly with, we still get together. We draft underdog teams. We talk about the NBA there more because I don't really do NBA in other spots. Okay. And those guys are all big NBA fans. So even though it used to be Club Top Shot, the vibe of the club lives on every Tuesday.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Let's talk about the Swolecast.
Yeah, this is a show. This was like one of the first times I got like an opportunity to do something for another site. And I remember David Kitchen, who will forever take credit for me being one of the branches of his tree. He reached out to me when Evan Silva was leaving the Swolecast. It was when Silva left Roto-World to go to ETR, and all of his, you know, main content, regular content was going to be at ETR. And so there was this hole left in the Swolecast. And for some reason they thought I had the shoes or the feet that could attempt to fill Evan Silva's big shoes. I definitely don't do that, but I found my own role on the show. And at this point, it's just a pure comedy podcast. We do draft teams. We talk DFS lineups in season, but it's more about me, Davis, David Kitchen, and Mr. Tuttle 05 just busting each other's balls for an hour every Wednesday.
So much content. How about ship chasing?
Yep, Ship Chasing. That's the show that I started doing with Pat Carrain back when. ADP Chasing is a show on the Ship Chasing channel.
Okay.
But we do that show every Wednesday night at 9:15 p.m. Eastern. We settled on that time a long time ago because waivers in the high stakes leagues process at 10 p.m. on Wednesday. So the show would be like, we'd get on there for 45 minutes and hash out what our bids were going to be. We're frantically going through our leagues. And since then, it's morphed into a place where we draft. People love tuning in to watch us do high stakes drafts. We've been doing best ball drafts. And yeah, it's now just kind of a staple of the calendar. Wednesdays, 9:15 is Ship Chasing.
How about Randomizer?
Randomizer is another show that was born out of the pandemic. You'll notice a theme there. A lot of the content I did, I really ramped it up when we were all stuck at home because of COVID. And I stumbled upon that format of, I was like, what would a weird best ball draft be? What if I spun a wheel to kind of dictate all the picks? And it used to start out like very simple, like you can only draft a wide receiver who's under 6 feet tall, or you have to draft a player on a team's mascot who is a bird. And then over the years, what I realized is the funnest element of the show is when the prompts are geared toward the guest specifically and their personal brand or things they like. And so now a lot of the prompts are crowdsourced and we get all these fun kind of challenge things. Like I had Jake Trowbridge from Fantasy Life on last week. He's a really funny dude, impressionist. And so we got a prompt where it was like, sell me on taking 5 tight ends as Denzel Washington, because Jake Trowbridge does an awesome Denzel Washington impersonation. So that's the Randomizer. I do it just in the summer. Ends up being 12 to 13 shows each year. And it's always a fun time on Thursday nights.
And that's we had Jason Moore on a few weeks ago, right? Yeah, that's great. So are there any other podcasts or shows or channels that you know that people should be on the lookout for?
I mean, I think you did a very good job. Splash Play is the one I do on Tuesdays with Chris Spags. LOLz is another one I do. That's a DFS podcast I do with Brian Hooper. And Brian's one of the top DFS players. And so we do that podcast on Thursday. There's always lots of drama going on in the DFS streets, so we cover it there. But man, I think you hit it. I'm scrolling through my YouTube. I have been doing some shows for YouTube members on my channel. I call it Best Ball After Dark. And those are kind of more intimate conversations with guests, catching up with old friends, learning about new people, kind of similar to the stuff we're doing here. And I do that for YouTube members on Friday and Saturday nights.
Well, it's incredible. I mean, it's such an incredible lineup. You do so much. It always blows my mind. I see you everywhere, and it's always something different. So it's pretty awesome. Let's dive into some rapid fire questions. I'll just rip off a question. You just let me know first things that come to mind. What do you love most about fantasy sports?
Man, I definitely am like, it's not lost on me. Like every few days, I'm like, holy cow, I just get to like draft fantasy teams on stream for a living. And I'm very, very fortunate about that. I think what is so fun to me right now, specifically with best ball, is it's such a new game and we have so little data. And right now from fantasy analysis, like the analysis has gotten so good. We have so many sharp people. We have so much data that some of these games are like close to solve. Like the DFS streets, there's so many guys who have these sims and incredible projections. And it's like, yeah, you can still have fun building the lineup, but man, it's hard to be a consistent winner. The thing I love about best ball right now is that it's still so new. There's so many edges to solve. We have Underdog launching new formats like they did with the weekly winners, which requires a lot of new strategic thought. And so I just love that we get to tackle these new puzzles and it's ever changing and everyone's trying to get an edge. And I just love that it's not this stale thing. We're always trying to get better and solve this stuff.
That's awesome. Name 2 people within the fantasy sports industry that you would pay to see doing stand-up live.
So, I mean, this one is so good. It goes back to the Swolecast where David Kitchen is hilarious, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, more so unintentionally. But I would pay good money to get to go and heckle David Kitchen while he did 10 minutes of stand-up. I think that would be incredible. And honestly, I think I would want it to be the whole Swolecast vibe. I think I would love to watch Davis Maddock do stand-up too. So maybe that just needs to be a thing. Maybe the entire Swolecast crew needs to plan 10 minutes of stand-up material and we all go and heckle each other at a club.
That would be hilarious. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. I've seen, a lot of people that have a background in stand-up, like Adam Rank or Howard Bender. Like there's so many people in the industry that have Jason Moore with some improv background. It's pretty interesting to see where people have brought comedy into fantasy sports.
For sure. Yeah. And it's definitely like served me well, at the one thing about doing stand-up or improv, you get confidence, right? You're going to fail. You're going to have some jokes that don't hit. I've bombed on stage more times than I would like to count. I almost said hundreds and I'm like, I hope it's not hundreds, but I have bombed tens and tens and tens of times on stage. And it does give you the kind of the confidence to do a lot of live streaming, do podcasts and know, you know what, if you have a bad show, doesn't matter. There's always another one.
Just move on. I love it. Name a person in the fantasy industry that you would want to watch a football game together with just to hear their insight and perspective on the game.
Yeah, man, this is a really good one. I think, over the years, one of the sites I first started doing work at was RotoViz. I think they're still like the best think tank for all of fantasy football. There's so many people that now know in the industry that started there, guys like Josh Hermsmeyer and Kevin Cole and Matthew Friedman and Davis Maddock, and so many people you like started writing over at over at RotoViz. And 2 of the people there, the former owner of the site, Fantasy Douche, he went by Frank DuPont. He's not much in the fantasy industry anymore, but just one of the most brilliant dudes you've ever met. And then the current owner, Sean Siegel, who I draft a team with every Wednesday on my channel. I think those 2 are just 2 of the sharpest guys all around, much less in fantasy, where they just see fantasy in the game just in such a really smart and unique way that even though they're more numbers guys, I would love to watch a game with them and just kind of get their kind of, pure, unfiltered thoughts in real time.
That's awesome. Name 2 people that you would love to just tailgate with before a football game.
Man, that is a really good one. One I would say, and I have partied with him before. I give Evan Silva a lot of crap and we have a nice little beef sometimes going online, but man, he is incredibly fun to party with. So Evan Silva at a tailgate. And I will also say, let's toss in Mike Leone, because Leone is another guy I've had the pleasure of hanging out with. And I think the dynamic, and we've gotten the man versus machine dynamic with Silva versus Leone on some of the ETR pods. I'd like to be front row, them drinking and bickering about fantasy football. That sounds like a good time to me.
That's great. What's your most memorable home fantasy league experience?
This is an interesting one. Yeah. I think one of the funny things is my like true home league, like my friends from home, like that league dissolved. It was like some guy didn't want to be the commissioner anymore. They all just, quit the league. But when I moved out to Boston, I just randomly got a sublet And the guys who lived there were Boston College law students. And I just became friends with them, being their roommates. And they were starting a fantasy league. This was about in 2010. And they said, hey, we need a 12th. We're all, in this league. Do you want to be in this league? And that has now become my de facto home league. And I've been in that league's been going now for 10 plus years. And it was not last year, but the year before that, we did a 10-year anniversary draft in Las Vegas. And one of the guys flew us all out there, rented like a suite at the Bellagio. And normally this draft, we always did online, cross country. We did in person at this Bellagio boardroom, but it was super fun. Got to meet a bunch of guys that I only knew from online and from playing in this league with them over the years. And so that was a very cool moment of, so much of this is now done online. So to get to do in real life, in-person stuff is super fun.
That's awesome. You found the right league. That's awesome. I was going to next ask what makes a great live draft, but I'm sure that that probably tops it, right?
It is that, the live draft experiences I get to do are kind of few and far between. There is a Boston-based league that I am part of that Kevin, the FF engineer, some people know him on Twitter, he commissions, and you get guys like Pat Thorman and Pete from WEEI, and there's a bunch of good guys in that league. And so once a year, we'll meet up and do that draft in person. And there is just nothing better about getting to go put the sticker up, like I'm sure you got to do at the SFB draft this past weekend. So to me, it's just, you got to have the board. You need the stickers, you need the drinks flowing. And yeah, I mean, beyond that, I don't think you need much more.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. What's your favorite last place punishment idea that you've heard of? Not necessarily something that you've done, but something that has floated by that you thought was pretty wild.
Yeah, I've seen, it's funny you say that too, because we're going to be doing some more stuff with that over at Fantasy Life this year, looking at fantasy punishments. I'm not sure what I can reveal yet because it hasn't been fully announced, but we're going to have some fun stuff on that. I do like going back to the stand-up comedy thing. I do think nothing is funnier than making someone who doesn't do stand-up or comedy go and have to do material. So I always like those. I think, some of the stuff with like the Waffle House stuck in the IHOP, that was very fun at first, but now it's a little bit played out. The stuff with like having to wear a costume while running a 5K, that's pretty good. But I think we are ripe for some creativity in the punishment area.
Right on. Name a few people that have had just a massive impact on you during your journey within the fantasy sports industry.
Man, it's honestly there. I could probably spend a full podcast with you listing off people who have supported me and helped me throughout the years. But I guess for the purpose of this question, I'll start with a couple people really early on. And this one is not going to surprise anyone. But when I started doing that podcast, the Fantasy Football Comedy Hour, we were probably 6 or 7 episodes in. Like I knew no one. If I got one like on a tweet or we got like 20 podcast downloads, I was like fist pumping here. But when we started that podcast, Scott Fish reached out and said, I really like the show you guys are doing. Do you have a website? And I was like, hi, Mr. Fish. Big fan of your work. No, we don't have a website. We have like 14 listeners. And sometimes people say like, oh yeah, our 14 listeners, and they're under exaggerating. I'm being dead serious. At the time we had 14 listeners and Scott Fish was willing to build us a website. And I was like, Scott, I don't have the budget for this. Like we're just doing this on the side. And he's like, no, let me make you a website. Scott Fish, 6 episodes in, made us a website. And that was just one of the coolest gestures of someone who is established in the industry being like, I like what you're doing. I want to support you. And then on that same note, when I started doing the man's character, Adam Levitan, and even at the time when he was at RotoWorld, had a ton of followers, and he was so supportive. He was the first person to come on and do a guest interview with me as the man's, which, doing that, you're getting thrown to the lion's den.
Yeah.
And he helped me out early on multiple times, making some connections for me, vouching for me. And I'll never forget that, because when you ask someone for like a vouch or to pass along a recommendation at that time, there's only downside for you, right? Because if the person turns out to be crazy or whatever, it reflects poorly on you. And Adam didn't even know me that well at the time and put in a good word for me in a couple really important spots that went a long way. And I'll never forget him being able to do that. And then of course, like I said, Matthew, picking me, out of the, all of the talented creators and asking me to work on his newsletter. That's obviously changed so much with my career. So those are 3 guys that I can point to. And I could go on and on. I got to give David Kitchen credit for asking me to come be on the Swolecast. But yeah, lots and lots of people who have supported me over the years.
Yeah, those are definitely some amazing people. That's pretty awesome. What advice do you have for aspiring fantasy sports analysts or people that are looking to get more involved into the fantasy industry?
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten this question a few times over the past few years, and I think I do always say like an answer along the same lines. And the one thing, the fantasy space now is so competitive, right? There's so many good creators, there's, so much good information that the one thing I always like, if you're optimizing to be like, what do I need to do to get like a full-time job? Or I'm going to do this thing because this will help me do that. What generally I see happen is you end up burning out or you end up doing stuff you don't like because you're like, I'm just trying to get this one thing. Not that I think that's not a worthwhile goal, but what I really think is important is finding something you genuinely love doing so it doesn't feel like work. Because if you're constantly looking at the clock, almost the a watch pot doesn't boil thing, you're going to start to get frustrated, dissatisfied. But if you're just genuinely loving the content you're making, good things inevitably come. And I do really believe that strongly. And your energy and your passion for something is so infectious that other people notice. Like I can tell what kind of content is just you checking a box, is just you going through the motions versus, holy shit, this person is passionate about this thing and they're going to do this either for free or forever, how much money. And so I think that's really the key is make sure it's sustainable. And how is work sustainable is because you genuinely love it and would do it for free otherwise.
That's awesome. Great advice for sure. So now 2023 season is coming quick. Is there a quarterback that you think you'll leave most of your drafts with this year?
So it's funny you ask that because again, one of the benefits of the Best Ball Hub over at Underdog is you can go and easily review your exposures. And there are definitely some guys I've been taking a lot. And I've been streaming all 150 of my Best Ball Mania drafts on my channel. And I'm kind of embarrassed to say this. There's two quarterbacks that I've selected in almost 17% of my drafts, which might not sound like a lot, but because I draft with guests and I'm often being like, who do you want to pick? Blah, blah, blah. My exposures get spread out. But if you're at 17%, it means you're more than double the field on them. So I consider those stands. And so to answer your question, I'm in on late round quarterbacks because a lot of times these quarterbacks are going early. I get shut out. I want to take wide receivers there, running backs. So Kenny Pickett on the Steelers, I'm buying him. I think the Steelers are going to have a nice bounce back this year with Kenny Pickett as a sophomore. And my other one, another sophomore quarterback, Sam Howell. I'm not buying the Jacoby Brissett stuff. I love his weapons with McLaurin and Jahan Dotson and those running backs there. I really do think Howell is going to have a really nice second year.
That's awesome. How about let's go through each position. How about running backs? Who do you have the most exposure with?
Yeah, this is great because I have my my exposure pulled up right now. I have two guys near 20%. One is James Cook on the Bills. And sometimes this one confuses people. They're like, what do you see with James Cook? And to me, it's getting access to one of the most explosive offenses in football via a player who I think can create more than it's given to him. And I know Damian Harris might be there stealing some goal line touchdowns, Josh Allen, but I think if there's a guy who can rip off big plays, who can be used in the passing game, it is James Cook. And the other thing we've seen over the years is it's basically what happened with Devin Singletary, where the team's like, yeah, we'd prefer to have him in a committee, but he ends up being the only guy they trust. And then all of a sudden you get bell cow Devin Singletary down the stretch. I think James Cook can do that in this offense. So when you're having to get him in the 9th round, 8th round, I love those prices. The other is rookie running back Zach Charbonnet. And this one's funny because I love Kenneth Walker too. I took Kenneth Walker at 6'1" today in a draft. So I'm basically like, give me one of these Seattle running backs, because I think one sneaky stat about the Seahawks is a lot of people assume like, oh, this might be a committee. Pete Carroll wants to use all these backs. If you actually look at the stats, the amount of games over the past 5 years where more than one running back has had 10 carries, I think it's only happened 6 or 7 times. I wrote about it in the newsletter. So Pete Carroll sneakily likes to use a bell cow. And as we saw last year with Kenneth Walker and Rashad Penny, it's like whichever guy is the lead back is going to be a smash. And so if Kenneth Walker stays healthy, I think he's going to be a smash. And if he were to get injured or dinged up, I think Charbonnet is just going to have a massive year.
That's awesome. How about wide receiver?
Wide receiver, yeah. So my highest exposure guys are going to be mostly late round guys, although right now at the top, and I even selected him again today, Treylon Burks is currently my most drafted wide receiver. Maybe that looks bad in that he's going to be cheaper now that DeAndre Hopkins came there. But I don't really think much has changed for his fantasy outlook. If anything, I have more confidence in him now because I think it means Ryan Tannehill is going to be the quarterback for 17 weeks. And before it was like, what if it's Malik Willis? What if it's Will Levis? I don't know how I feel about this. It could get dicey. So even though Burks probably doesn't have upside for like a 30% target share anymore because Hopkins is there, I think that's going to be offset. He's going to be more efficient, better quarterback play, better offense, more red zone trips. So I still love the year 2 breakout potential for Treylon Burks.
That's great. How about tight end?
Tight end, there's a couple guys I select a decent amount. My highest roster tight end now is Greg Dulcich. And this kind of dovetails with I am in on a Broncos bounce back this year. And I've been really liking a lot of the cheaper pieces. I take both Javonte Williams and Samaje Perine. I take Dulcich and I take Marvin Mims a lot as well. And so Dulcich, I think, is just a really nice opportunity for a tight end breakout. He was really good as a rookie. Now you get a better offense here, hopefully with Sean Payton at the helm. And I think he's just, where he's going. My average ADP on him is pick 148. He's now going at 131. So I think there's just very few tight ends that late who give you his kind of upside.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's all great information. I mean, all those players are affordable. If you want them, you can get them. That's cool to get, instead of naming Christian McCaffrey and Jamar Chase, you're talking about players that can actually get on your roster. You just go get them. I love it. Well, Pete, is there anything else that we haven't covered that you'd like to share before we close things out here today?
No, I mean, I feel like exhausted just recapping all of the things I do. It's somewhat embarrassing. I feel like I maybe bite off more than I can chew, but it's just so much fun. It's like over the years I've added these shows and I have so much fun doing them with my various co-hosts. And I think on the you mentioned the tailgate one, but it's crazy because I've been doing some shows like LOLz with Brian Hooper or Splash Play with Chris Spags. I've never met those guys in person. So those would be 2 other candidates that I would love to meet up and have a beer with because I've made, 100+ hours of content with each of those guys and never hung out with them in person. So I definitely got to change that soon.
Yeah, that's the coolest thing about, fantasy events like FSGA or obviously the Expo, where you can actually meet people that you already feel like friends. So it's cool. I'm glad that you got a list now. You just gotta go meet those people. I love it.
For sure, man. And I appreciate you having me on. And I love your the backdrop. You got the TV. You got the images scrolling by. Now, is that real brick or is that a brick facade?
I mean, it's a facade, but it's it's getting the job done.
I like it. The set's looking real good.
I love. Well, thank you so much, Pete. I love having you on. Again, I've been a big fan of everything you're doing. I'm glad that you've joined the Girl Dad Club. Wish you all the best in that respect, and I cannot wait to see what you got in store for 2023.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, appreciate it. Glad we were able to sync up, and I actually have bookmarked your episode with Kendall from a few days ago. I'm excited to go watch that one as well.
Awesome. Appreciate it, buddy.
We'll see you, Kevin.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast. Until next time, be sure to follow and subscribe to all of FFU's social media accounts for daily content.